"Can you give us a minute?" my father said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at Marcus. Marcus nodded, like he had already decided it was fine. The nurse stepped out. My aunt followed. The room cleared in less than 10 seconds. Then it was just the two of us. Machines humming quietly. A monitor blinking in steady intervals. I pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. He still didn't look at me right away. Then finally, he did. And the first thing he said wasn't about his condition. It wasn't about the hospital. It wasn't even about the family. He said, "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." I thought I knew what this conversation was going to be. I was wrong. That's where this really begins. Before I get to what he said in that room, you need to understand what led up to it. Because that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years, just not in a way anyone ever pointed to directly. I was always introduced second, not in a formal way. No one ever said it out loud. But it happened often enough that it became normal. This is Marcus, and this is his younger brother. That was the structure. At family gatherings, at school events, even when we were both adults. Marcus first, then me. He was 3 years older, more outgoing, more confident in the way people notice immediately. Teachers liked him. Coaches relied on him. Relatives talked about him like he was already on a path. I was easier to overlook, not invisible, just quieter in comparison. When Marcus brought home a good report card, my father would sit with him at the table. Ask questions. Go through each subject. "What are you aiming for next term?" he would say. While I brought home mine, he would glance at it for a few seconds. "This is fine," he'd say. Then he would hand it back. It didn't feel unfair at the time. It just felt like that's how things worked. When Marcus joined the school football team, my father was at every game. Saturday mornings, 9 a.m. kickoffs, standing on the sidelines, talking to other parents. When I joined a smaller team 2 years later, he came to the first game, stood near the back, left before it ended, said he had something to take care of. I didn't question it. Not then, because as a kid, you don't always recognize patterns. You just adapt to them. You learn what gets attention and what doesn't. And eventually, you stop expecting certain things altogether. By the time I was in my late teens, I had adjusted completely. Marcus was the one my father spoke to about plans. University, career, long-term goals. I was the one he assumed would figure things out on my own. Not as a compliment, just as a default. At 18, when Marcus got into a competitive business program, my father told everyone. At a family dinner, I remember him saying, "He's always had that drive." Marcus nodded, a little uncomfortable, but didn't correct him. 2 years later, when I got accepted into a solid engineering program, my father said, "That suits you." Same tone, same phrasing, different weight. I remember standing in the kitchen after that dinner, holding a glass of water I didn't drink. Marcus walked in, opened the fridge, and said, "He just talks like that." I nodded. I know, and I did. That was the thing. None of it was hidden. It just wasn't acknowledged. If you've ever grown up in a situation like that, where nothing is openly wrong, but something is consistently uneven, you learn to adjust without calling it what it is. If you recognize that feeling, you'll want to stay for the rest of this. Hit subscribe. I didn't resent Marcus for it. That's something people assume. But it wasn't like that. Marcus wasn't responsible for how my father treated us. He just fit more easily into what my father understood. They spoke the same way, thought about things the same way. When Marcus talked about business or strategy, my father leaned in. When I talked about systems or design, he nodded, but the conversation didn't go anywhere. Over time, that difference became routine. Not painful in any one moment, just consistent. When we were both in our 20s, Marcus stayed close to home, worked in a firm not far from where we grew up, saw my father regularly. I moved to another city for work, not far, about a 2-hour drive, but enough that visits became occasional instead of frequent. Calls were brief, practical. "How's work?" "Good." "That's good." That was usually the extent of it. Marcus, on the other hand, would call and stay on the phone for 20 minutes, discuss things, ask questions, share updates. And my father responded to that. You could hear it in his voice. More engaged, more present. I didn't try to change that. By that point, I understood the structure of the relationship. I didn't need to push against it. I built my life independently, focused on my work, my routine. Things moved forward steadily. Promotions, new projects, small milestones that added up over time. My father knew about some of it, mostly through brief updates, never in detail, never in a way that led to a longer conversation. And that was fine. At least, that's what I told myself, because it was easier to accept it than to question it. Everything stayed like that for years. Predictable, stable in its own way, until the call came. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 3:40 p.m. I was at my desk when my phone lit up. Marcus. I answered. Hey. There was a pause on the other end. Then he said, Dad's in the hospital. That was the first time something interrupted the pattern. And when I got there, I realized nothing else had changed at all. The hospital was about 20 minutes from where my father lived. I got there just after 5 p.m. The parking lot was half full. People moving in and out without much urgency. It didn't feel like an emergency place. Just steady. I walked through the entrance, followed the signs to the third floor, and checked in at the front desk. The nurse looked at the screen and said, Family, yes. She nodded and pointed down the hallway. Room 312. Your brother is already there. Of course he was. I walked down the corridor. White walls, low lighting, the kind of place where everything is designed to feel neutral. The door to the room was slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Marcus was standing near the window, speaking quietly with a doctor. My father was in the bed, propped up slightly, looking smaller than I remembered. Not dramatically different, just reduced in a way that was hard to define. Marcus turned when I walked in. Hey, he said. Hey. The doctor glanced at me, then back at Marcus. We'll go over the rest once we have the test results, he said. Marcus nodded. Okay. Then the doctor left. Marcus stepped closer to the bed. How are you feeling? He asked. My father looked at him. Fine, he said. Just tired. His voice was steady. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward me. A quick acknowledgement. Then back to Marcus. What did they say? My father asked. Marcus answered. They're running a few more tests. Nothing urgent, but they want to be sure. My father nodded. That makes sense. I stood near the foot of the bed. Not ignored, but not included either. It wasn't intentional. It was just the pattern. A nurse came in a few minutes later. She walked directly to Marcus. Are you the son? She asked. Marcus nodded. Yes. She explained something about medication, timing follow-up tests. Marcus asked questions. Clear, direct. She answered all of them. Then she handed him a sheet of paper. Let us know if anything changes, she said. Marcus nodded again. Will do. She glanced at me on her way out. Visiting hours are flexible for immediate family, she added. Then she left. I watched that exchange without reacting. Because it wasn't new. Different setting, same structure. Marcus turned to me. They think it's manageable, he said. They just want to monitor things. I nodded. All right. We stood there for a moment. Then Marcus said, I've been here since this morning. Yeah. They called early. I understood what that meant. He was the first call. Not surprising. My father shifted slightly in the bed. Did you drive straight here? He asked Marcus. Yes. Good. Another pause. Then he looked at me again. You made it quickly, he said. I was working nearby, I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it simplified the explanation. He nodded, then looked back at Marcus. Did you bring the documents? He asked. Marcus reached into his bag. Yeah, I've got everything. He placed a folder on the small table next to the bed. Papers neatly organized. Prepared. I watched that too. Not because it bothered me, just because it confirmed something. Even here in a hospital room, the roles hadn't changed. Marcus handled things. I was present, and for a while, it continued like that. Doctors came in, spoke mostly to Marcus. Nurses asked him questions first. Family members arrived and greeted him as if he was the point of contact. How is he doing? My aunt asked Marcus when she walked in. He's stable, Marcus said. They're still checking a few things. She nodded. Good. Then she turned to me. You made it, she said. Yes. She gave a small smile. Then her attention shifted back to Marcus. It wasn't intentional. It never was. But it was consistent. Around 6:30 p.m., things settled down. Fewer people in the room. The noise from the hallway softened. Marcus stepped out to take a call. My aunt followed him a minute later. And for the first time since I arrived, it was just me and my father. He looked at me for a second, longer than before, then said, "You've been quiet." I pulled the chair closer to the bed. "Nothing much to add," I said. He nodded slowly, then looked away. The monitor beside him blinked steadily. A soft, repetitive sound filled the space between us. After a moment, he said, "Marcus has been handling most of this." "Yes, he's good at that." "I know." Another pause. Then he said something that sounded familiar. "You've always been more independent." I didn't respond, because I had heard that before. Different words, same meaning. He adjusted his position slightly, winced for a second, then settled back. "I'll be fine," he said. "They're just being careful." I nodded. All right. There wasn't much else to say. The conversation didn't move anywhere. Just small statements. Short answers. Then the door opened again. Marcus walked back in. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," my father said. "We were just talking." Marcus nodded, then looked at me. "You staying a bit longer?" "Yeah." "Good." He checked his phone briefly, then put it away. The room returned to its earlier rhythm. Marcus near the bed, me slightly back, conversations moving around me instead of through me. And I realized something as I stood there. Even here, even now, nothing had changed. Not the structure, not the roles, not the way he looked at Marcus first. I had seen this before, just never this clearly. And as I watched him ask Marcus another question without looking at me at all, I started to understand what this conversation was actually going to be about. The next morning, I came back earlier, just after 9:15 a.m. The hallway was quieter than the evening before. Fewer visitors. More staff moving between rooms with clipboards and coffee cups. While I walked in, Marcus was already there. Of course he was. He was sitting in the chair next to the bed, reading something on his phone. A notebook and a pen were on the table beside him. He had already started organizing things. My father was awake. He looked at Marcus first. "Did you speak to the doctor?" he asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "They're waiting on one more result." My father nodded. Then his eyes moved toward me. "You're back," he said. "Yes." He studied me for a moment, then looked back at Marcus. That was enough. It always was. Around 10:30 a.m., the doctor came in again. Same pattern. He stood closer to Marcus. Explained the situation in measured terms. "Nothing critical," he said, "but we want to keep him here a few more days." Marcus asked questions. "What are we looking at long term? Is there anything we should be preparing for?" The doctor answered. I stood near the foot of the bed again, listening. Not included, not excluded, just present. After the doctor left, my aunt arrived with coffee. She handed one to Marcus first. "Thought you might need this," she said. He smiled. "Thanks." She handed one to me next. "Here." I nodded. "Thank you." We stood there for a few minutes, talking about small things. Weather, traffic, how long my father might stay. Nothing important. Around noon, Marcus stepped out again to take a call. My aunt followed him. And just like that, the room was quiet. My father shifted slightly, then looked at me. "This is inconvenient," he said. I sat down. "It's temporary." He nodded. Then there was a pause, longer than usual. He looked at the ceiling for a second, then back at me. "I asked them to give us a minute later," he said. I didn't respond, just waited. He adjusted the blanket with one hand. Not nervous, just deliberate. "I need to talk to you," he said. That wasn't something he said often. Not to me. I nodded. "Okay." Another pause. Then he said, "Not about this." He gestured slightly, meaning the hospital. "All right." He took a breath. Slow. Controlled. "I've been thinking about things," he said. I didn't interrupt. He looked at me directly this time. Not quickly. Not as an afterthought. Directly. And that alone was different. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "I didn't treat you and Marcus the same." It wasn't phrased as a question. Not even as an apology. Just a statement. I sat there, didn't respond, because I didn't know where he was going with it. He continued. That wasn't an accident. Another pause. He was watching my reaction now. Carefully. I did it deliberately, he said. The word landed clearly. Deliberately. He didn't rush past it. He let it sit there. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Still quiet. Because part of me was waiting for the rest of it. The explanation. The reasoning that would make it make sense. He gave it. I saw more of myself in him, he said. A small nod toward the door, where Marcus had been standing earlier. He needed guidance, he added. Structure. Then he looked at me again. You didn't. I didn't move. Didn't react. He kept going. You were always capable, he said. You figured things out. Same tone he had used my entire life. Measured. Certain. As if this explained everything. I thought you didn't need the same attention, he said. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation. Given the same way he had always spoken. Clean. Controlled. As if saying it clearly made it reasonable. I sat with that for a few seconds. Not long. Just enough to understand what he had actually said. Because it wasn't new information. Not really. It was just the first time he had said it out loud. And hearing it like that, in that room, with nothing else around it, made it impossible to ignore. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to interpret what he meant. He had already told me. Clearly. Then I asked the only question that came to mind. Did you ever consider that being able to handle it doesn't mean it didn't hurt? I didn't raise my voice. Didn't change my tone. Just asked it. He didn't answer right away. In fact, he didn't answer at all. He looked at me. Held the eye contact for a few seconds. Then looked away. Toward the window. The monitor continued its steady rhythm beside him. No change. No interruption. Just that quiet, consistent sound. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, he didn't have anything to say. Not a comment. Not a correction. Not a way to frame it differently. Just silence. And that silence said more than anything he could have added. Because for once, there was nothing to soften it. Nothing to hide behind. Just the truth sitting there between us. Unanswered. The door opened a few minutes later. Marcus walked in first, finishing his sentence into his phone. No, just send it over. I'll review it tonight. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket like nothing had happened. My aunt came in behind him with a paper bag from the cafe downstairs. I got something you might actually eat, she said, placing it on the table. The room filled again. Movement. Small conversations. The normal rhythm of people trying to make a hospital room feel less like one. My father looked at Marcus. Did you check with the doctor about discharge timing? Marcus nodded. They're saying Monday. Maybe earlier if the last result comes back clean. My father gave a short nod. All right. No hesitation. No follow-up. Just acceptance. Marcus opened the bag and handed him a small container. Soup, he said. They said to keep it light. My father took it. Good. They spoke for a few minutes about medication schedules. Follow-ups. What needed to be signed. I stood near the window. Not outside the conversation, just not inside it either. And for the first time, I noticed something specific. I wasn't preparing anything. Usually, I would be thinking ahead, filling in what I might say, adjusting how I would respond if I was asked something. Now I wasn't doing that. I was just listening. Marcus asked another question. Do we need to set up anything at home before he gets discharged? The nurse, who had come in quietly, answered him directly. Yes, we'll give you a list before he leaves. She handed the paper to Marcus. Not to both of us. To him. Same pattern. Different room. I watched it happen, and didn't feel the need to step into it. That was new. After a while, Marcus checked his watch. I'm going to run back to the house, he said. Pick up a few things. My aunt nodded. I'll stay here for a bit. Marcus looked at me. You staying? Yeah. All right. I'll be back in about an hour. He grabbed his jacket and left. The room quieted again. Not completely silent, just less full. My aunt stepped out a few minutes later to take a call. And once again, it was just the two of us. My father finished a few spoonfuls of soup, then set the container aside. He didn't look at me. Didn't return to what he had said earlier. It was as if that conversation had already been placed somewhere, handled, closed. I stayed where I was, not waiting, not expecting him to bring it up again. After a minute, he spoke. You'll coordinate with Marcus on the paperwork. Not a question, just a direction. I nodded. Okay. He has everything organized. I saw. That was the extent of it. No shift in tone. No acknowledgement of what had been said earlier. Just the same structure, continuing exactly as it always had. I walked over to the chair and picked up my jacket. Not leaving yet, just holding it. He glanced at me briefly. You heading out? In a bit. He nodded, then looked back at the wall in front of him. The monitor beside him kept its steady rhythm. Beep. Pause. Beep. Consistent. Unchanged. I stood there for another moment. Not because I needed something from him, but because I was noticing something I hadn't noticed before. There was nothing left to wait for. Not in that room. Not in that conversation. Not in that relationship. I wasn't holding space for something to be said later. I wasn't expecting a different version of what I had already heard. It was all already there. Clear. Complete. I put my jacket on, zipped it halfway. I'm going to step out, I said. He nodded once. All right. No, see you later. No, come back tomorrow. Just acknowledgement. I walked out into the hallway. The door closed softly behind me. For a second, I stood there. People moved past me. Nurses, visitors, carts rolling quietly across the floor. I checked the time. 1:18 p.m. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Opened the notes app. Not to write about him. Not to process the conversation. Just to write something simple. 3 lines. Things I would do moving forward. Practical. Clear. No adjustments to my time that weren't mine to make. No expectations I hadn't agreed to. No conversations I needed to revisit later. I read it once, then locked the screen, put the phone back in my pocket, and started walking toward the exit, because whatever that conversation had been, it wasn't something I needed to carry forward the way I used to. And that realization made the next part simple. I already knew exactly how I was going to show up from this point on. After that day, nothing dramatic happened. There was no follow-up conversation, no second attempt to revisit what he had said. The next time I came to the hospital, Marcus was already there again. Same chair, same position, a different set of papers on the table. My father looked up when I walked in. Hey, he said. Hey. Then his attention shifted back to Marcus. What did they say about discharge? Marcus answered. Probably Monday. My father nodded. That works. I stood near the window again. The same spot as before. It felt familiar already. Not uncomfortable. Just defined. Over the next few days, I came by regularly. Sometimes in the morning. Sometimes in the evening. The timing didn't matter much. The structure stayed the same. Marcus handled the details. Spoke to the doctors. Organized the paperwork. I was there. Present. Helping where it made sense. Picking up things from the house when needed. Dropping off items. Sitting for a while. Then leaving. No tension. No confrontation. Just roles continuing the way they always had. But something was different. Not in what I was doing. In how I was doing it. One afternoon, a nurse walked in and asked, "Can someone sign this?" She held the clipboard out. Marcus reached for it, then paused and looked at me. "You want to take this one?" he said. It wasn't loaded. Just a simple question. I shook my head. "You've got it." He nodded. "All right." Signed the paper and handed it back. The nurse smiled politely and left. Small moment. But I noticed it, because for the first time, I wasn't stepping into a gap. I wasn't trying to balance anything. I was just staying where I had already decided to be. That same afternoon, my father looked at me and said, "You've been coming by consistently." "Yes." He nodded. "Good." That was it. No expansion. No added meaning. Just the statement. And I understood something in that moment. This was as much acknowledgement as I was going to get. Not about the past. Not about what he had said. Just the present. And that was enough. Later that evening, Marcus and I stepped out into the hallway together. He leaned against the wall for a second. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded. I didn't know he was going to say that, he added. "I know." He looked at the floor briefly. He's not great with explaining things. I let that sit, then said, "He explained it." Marcus gave a small, tight smile. Yeah, I guess he did. There was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet. Then he said, "You're handling this well." I didn't respond right away, because I wasn't thinking about how I was handling anything. I was just not doing what I used to do. Not adjusting. Not filling in gaps. Not trying to correct something that had already been made clear. I said, "I'm just showing up." Marcus nodded. "Yeah." Then he pushed off the wall. "I'm going to grab something to eat," he said. "All right." He walked down the hallway. I stayed there for a second longer, then went back into the room. My father was resting, eyes closed, the monitor beside him steady. I pulled the chair closer and sat down. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to, because for the first time, I wasn't sitting there waiting for something else to happen. I wasn't expecting a different version of him to appear. I wasn't holding on to the idea that the conversation we had would change anything moving forward. It already had, just not in a way he might have thought. It hadn't repaired anything. It hadn't brought us closer. It had just made things clear. And once things are clear, you don't have to keep adjusting to them. You just respond accordingly. A few days later, he was discharged. Monday morning, around 11:20 a.m., Marcus handled the paperwork, spoke to the nurse, reviewed the instructions. I carried a small bag of his belongings out to the car, set it in the back seat, closed the door. Marcus came out a minute later, helping my father walk slowly down the steps. They moved carefully, no rush. I opened the passenger door. My father sat down, adjusted slightly, then looked up at me. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. "Of course." Marcus closed the door, walked around to the driver's side. I stepped back, watched them for a second. Then Marcus looked over. "You heading out?" "Yeah." "All right. I'll call you later." "Okay." He got in, started the car. They pulled out of the lot slowly. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, then turned and walked back toward my own car, because everything that needed to be said had already been said, and everything that needed to be decided already had been. After he was discharged, things didn't change all at once. They shifted into something quieter, more structured. Marcus handled most of the logistics, appointments, medication schedules, follow-ups. He lived closer. It made sense. I visited a few times a week, usually in the evenings, around 6:30 or 7. The house looked exactly the same. Same couch, same table, same chair my father always sat in. But there were small additions. A pill organizer on the side table, a printed schedule taped near the kitchen doorway, a glass of water that was always half full, always within reach. When I walked in, the routine was predictable. Marcus would be in the kitchen or going through paperwork at the table. My father would be in his chair, and the conversation would start the same way. "How are you?" he would ask. "Good." "That's good." That was the rhythm. No variation, no follow-up. And for the first time, that didn't feel incomplete. It just felt accurate. We didn't go back to what he said in the hospital. Not once. Not even in passing. It wasn't avoided. It just wasn't revisited, like it had already been addressed in his mind. Finished. For me, it stayed. Not heavy. Not something I needed to process repeatedly. Just something I understood now. One evening, about 2 weeks after he got home, I arrived a little earlier than usual. 6:10 p.m. Marcus wasn't there yet. The house was quiet. I walked in and found my father in the kitchen, standing at the counter. He was trying to open a container, twisting the lid slowly, carefully. I stepped over. "Here." I took it from him, loosened it, and handed it back. "Thanks," he said. He didn't look embarrassed. Didn't make a comment about it. Just accepted it. That was new. We stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then he walked back to his chair and sat down. I followed a few seconds later. The television was on, volume low, a news program neither of us was watching. After a minute, he said, "You've always been able to manage on your own." Same sentence, same tone, the kind of line that used to carry something underneath it. Now it didn't. I said, "I learned to." He nodded once. That's important. I didn't respond, didn't expand it. Just let it sit where it was. Marcus walked in a few minutes later. "Traffic was bad," he said, dropping his keys on the table. My father nodded. All right. Marcus glanced at me. You been here long? Just got here. He nodded and headed into the kitchen. The moment passed, exactly the way most moments in that house always had. Over the next few months, the visits continued. Consistent. Predictable. I helped with small things when it made sense. Picked up groceries once or twice. Drove him to an appointment on a Wednesday morning when Marcus couldn't make it. Waited in the lobby for 40 minutes while he was inside. Scrolled through emails. Checked the time. When he came out, I stood up, took the paper from his hand, and asked, "Everything straightforward?" "Yes," he said. That was enough. We didn't talk about anything deeper on the drive back. Just directions. Traffic. When the next appointment was scheduled. And for the first time, that didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like we were operating within the actual limits of the relationship. Nothing forced. Nothing expected. One afternoon, my aunt stopped by while I was there. She stood in the doorway for a second, watching us. My father in his chair, me sitting across from him. The television on, volume low. Then she said, "It's good to see you both here." I nodded. "Yeah." She looked at my father. "He's been coming by a lot." My father glanced at me, then back at her. "He's consistent," he said. That was it. That was the word. Consistent. Not praise. Not comparison. Not correction. Just a description. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't waiting for a different word anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to say something that would change how everything felt, because I already understood it. The hospital conversation hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't rewritten anything. It had just explained it. He didn't see me less by accident. He chose it, deliberately, the same way he had said. And hearing that even once had removed the question, but it didn't repair the result. It just clarified it. That was the part one hadn't expected. I thought acknowledgement would feel like resolution. It didn't. It just removed uncertainty. And once uncertainty is gone, there's nothing left to chase. A few months later, I was leaving his house after a short visit. It was around 8:05 p.m. The street was quiet. A couple of cars parked along the curb. Porch lights on. I walked to my car, opened the door, then paused for a second. Not because I had forgotten something, because I noticed something. I wasn't replaying the visit. I wasn't thinking about what I should have said differently. I wasn't carrying anything forward from it. I just got in the car, started the engine, and left. That had never happened before. And that's when it became clear. The relationship hadn't improved. It hadn't worsened. It had just settled into what it actually was. And once I stopped trying to make it something else, there was nothing left to carry. If there's one thing I took from that conversation in the hospital, it's this. Some truths arrived too late to change what happened, but just early enough to explain why it always felt the way it did. And once you understand that, you don't need anything else from the person who finally said it. If that resonates with you, you're already in the right place. Hit subscribe. There's more of this ahead. And before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever finally gotten the explanation you were waiting for and realized it didn't actually fix anything? If you have, share in the comments. You might find more people understand that than you think. There's another story I want to tell you next, because sometimes the answers we wait the longest for are the ones that change the least but clarify everything.